Today was a good example of that as well. We had incoming thunderstorms, some of which were severe in the far southwestern portions of the metro area, but as it approached into the cooler, drier air, it really helped to erode the insignificance of some of those storms, and they turned out to be light to moderate rain producers, but there were a few strong thunderstorms in there this morning. But again, the influence of the lake coming into play there, and the dry air intrusion from the high off to the east of us. So there's so many different things for us to have to look at every single day. Some days it's much easier than others, but most of the time it's not.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you, thank you. Let's talk about climate change for a moment. You may be aware that in May there was an interesting article in the New York Times that talked about how climate scientists have told city planners that based on current trends, by the end of this century, Chicago will feel more like Baton Rouge than a northern metropolis due to climate change. So I guess in a general sense, are you of the opinion that Chicago is shifting away from this northern, cooler climate to something that may resemble climates in the Deep South? And then we have a couple of people from the city of Chicago who can talk about what the city is doing now to help to address this long-term outlook. So, but first I'd like to just get some general opinions on climate change, and I know, Rick, you touched on it, but if we could just talk about that.
Well, first off, we need to change the phrase from climate change and global warming to climate variability. And the reason why is this past spring has been an excellent example of climate variability in the short term. When you start to preach climate change and preach the fact that our climate is going to be more like Baton Rouge at the end of the century, everybody totally dismisses the fact that we can still have cold, we can still have snow, we can still have 50 inches of snow, and what you end up doing is you destroy the base for people to go, wow, you think that could still happen. So when we start to preach the fact that we're going to have all these changes occur in 90 years, that makes people completely forget about what's happening in the short term. So that's the first thing we have to do. Because if you look at the difference between the beginning and an end, all people think about is the range. What's the difference between 10 and 2? It's 8. But you may have gone to 20, you may have gone down to minus 20, you may have gone up to plus 30 or minus 30. In the end, you may still have a difference of 8, but it's how you got there. And I think that's what the basic fundamental problems are, is when discussing global warming and climate change, you really have to start to predict climate variability. And I think that's where we need to do that. In regards to the actual question of whether or not we're going to have a climate like Baton Rouge, I think that's kind of pushing it a little bit. You're talking about almost 60 to 70 days where we're going to have temperatures above 90. Will we have more of a variability of extreme heat, extreme drought, extreme flooding, and also extreme snowstorms? That's another question I still think has some open answers as well.
Yeah, I'd like to touch on that as well. We just referred to a few moments ago that the average number of 90-degree days here in the metro area, at least in the city, is about 18 or 19. Back in 1988, if I recall, we had 47 days of 90-plus degree temperatures. Now that's the most we've ever recorded. You start going down to the desert Southwest, and that seems like a walk in the park for them. So I think that you can read as many periodicals, as many articles, as many books, and find differing opinions. But I would guess that if we took a little poll right now amongst some of my colleagues, just by a show of hands, how many of you actually believe, first of all, in favor of or support the global warming that is man-made? Raise your hand.
And the other thing about the whole subject matter, and I kind of like what Rick had stated in the terminology, is for us, I think, to be able to discuss it has become so political. And people often, think, well, she must be of this particular political party, or he must be, on this side. And it's not about choosing sides, it's about evidence, and it's about research. And I think that's something that you need to pay attention to. When we had the blizzard in February, I heard many comments, well, what happened to global warming?
Well, not only that, but I would expound upon that comment initially. Tammy did say that she was in favor of, but I'm guessing...
Yeah, I'll
okay, she'll follow up on that. But the rest of you, no one else raised their hand, nor did I. Again, I think that, when you hear that there is a consensus and that the majority of scientists believe that global warming is in fact taking place and it is man-made, I think therein lies where we can actually stop and sit down and have a greater discussion. But I think this is a long way from being completed and a signed, sealed, and delivered document. I think there's a lot to go on. In fact, I brought as an example today one particular article in this magazine versus a few others that I've published you could literally spend not hundreds of hours, but thousands of hours, not only in a library, but on the internet, combing over all of these articles that are both encounter opposition to one another. So only over time will we know. I think the bottom line is that we are, as humans, provided that we approach this with common sense, we're good stewards of the planet. The bottom line is we should take care of the planet to the best of our ability. And I think that the end result is that we'll benefit in the long run. But I'm not in the camp right now that would say that we're causing all of this.
You know, let's not lose sight of the fact that this is a forum for the people of the city of Chicago. So when we think about variability, we think about what happened during the weekend of Memorial Day. Were people prepared to experience temperatures above 90 degrees and heat index values above 100? Were people prepared last week to have 3 consecutive days where the heat index was above 100? What tends to happen in high variable climate regimes is that you may have 4 or 5 days of temperatures in the 70s, and while you're looking at the 7-day forecast that Tracy or Megan or Tammy may put up, and they say, wow, temperatures are going to be in the mid-90s with heat index values above 100, if it's a cool day in Chicago, people go, that's not going to happen. And therefore, they're not prepared. For the city of Chicago, you need to be more concerned about the high degrees of variability. So if someone says that I do think the heat index is going to hit 100, even though today was 60, you say, you know what? I think we need to do something about getting an air conditioner in grandma's house because they say this is going to happen. So forget about the fact that we're going to be Baton Rouge in 80 or 90 years. We need to be more aware of changes in the short term and the fact that they're going to have high degrees of variability.
What I was going to say is, I guess I'm the only one here. I've done a lot of stories on this. I've interviewed a lot of people nationally and internationally on both sides of this issue. First of all, there's no climatologists on this panel. None of us are climatologists. It's a totally different science from meteorology. We know enough to be dangerous, but not enough to really tell you exactly what's going to happen. They, the climatologists, know enough about daily weather to be dangerous, but putting a daily forecast together is not their bag either. We do cross over in some things. I will say this. Every single day the climate is changing in some aspect. And like Rick said, there's variability in the climate. And that's what all of the forecast models for the next 100 years have said. They've said we're going to go up, we're going to go down, we're going to have cool periods, we're going to have hot periods. I think ultimately, whether man has a big role in this or a small role, I don't think that man is exclusive to causing the change of the climate, but I do think that there are possibilities there. I think if you stand in a bathroom and you heat it up enough and you smoke enough cigarettes and so forth, you'll see that there's an issue going on. Whether that's what we're doing to our atmosphere or not, the research will go on, and there's a lot of debate. I think it's up to you to actually take in the most information you can and make a very informed decision, and there's a lot of misinformation on both sides of this issue that are out there. One thing I think that brought up so much concern with this is that in the northern latitudes, you get up into Alaska, Siberia, they've seen a much greater change in their temperatures, and the land warms up much quicker and cools down much quicker than the oceans. So if the oceans go up 1 degree, you're saying, well, that's kind of nice. It's going to feel good to go swimming. But the land could go much faster than that. It could go up 4, 8, 10 degrees. So when they see things like this, the world scientists, the climatologists, they become a little bit alarmed because they worry about human beings as a species. A lot of species cannot adapt. They don't have the intelligence that we do to actually cool ourselves down, warm ourselves up, take care of business. So there are species that could go extinct in that type of situation. So I think what you see here is cities like Chicago that deal with a giant urban heat island effect, that deal with a huge population, that deal with caring for all these people, taking proactive measures to make sure that, okay, let's plant some trees that could actually be in a more temperate environment. Let's not lose all of our trees and look like downtown Phoenix 50 years from now. Let's make sure that we have rooftop gardens. Let's try to get more efficient with our use of energy, things like this. And I think that's probably a very smart thing to do. That said, we're going to have some very cold periods over the next 50, 100 years. I won't be here. I'll be dead as a doornail, so I don't even know how this story is going to turn out. But I think it's great that we have local government that wants to be proactive and be prepared in any instance, and that's what I would say is important. For the lake also, the lake would be greatly affected by any type of climate change, and so I think it's very good that there are stewards that are looking at that as well.
Yeah, I would think that the city of Chicago is very proactive, And what harm could it do to do the things that we're doing to prepare for what might happen in the future? I would argue, what is the downside? Is there one? Probably not.
Yeah, in fact, since we have a couple people from Department of Environment and Department of Public Health, and as well as Peter Raber there on the end with OEMC, if we could just talk a little bit about what the city's doing, how they received this report, and what's happening now to prepare not only for now, but down the road.
Yeah, I think that the article that was recently published in the New York Times was fabulous because it brought a lot of attention on the work that we're doing in the city to prepare for climate change. But I also think that it's important to note that a city in its function is it's naturally there to take care of its people, to take care of its natural area, and to build an infrastructure that lasts. So climate change is just really one more factor to consider in building a community that's resilient. And with that said, it's a very, very large factor, but it's about good planning, I think is what adaptation is about. And so some of the work that we're doing with the city looks to this very point about a changing climate, and that we're seeing variability, we're seeing there's not a consistent pattern that we're seeing, but being able to look at the science and say, we're going to see things that we wouldn't otherwise expect. We're planning earlier, and we're able to plan better. So we engaged with some atmospheric researchers at Texas Tech University and the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign when we were planning the Chicago Climate Action Plan, which is the city's sustainability plan to reduce the effects of climate change and also prepare for the effects of climate change. So we looked at the research, and what we saw were projections saying we're going to see things that are extreme, and we're going to see things that are gradual. So we're going to see extreme heat days, we're going to see extreme precipitation days, but we're also going to see shifts in where plants can thrive in Chicago, and shifts in possibly the diseases that are present in Chicago, which of course Dr. Luff can elaborate on. But as we're seeing these things, we said, what does that mean for the programs that we're implementing in Chicago? So we are preparing the target areas in Chicago around people that are affected, the built environment that's affected, and the natural land areas in Chicago that are affected, and taking actions like our Chicago Transit Authority is increasing the number of rail ties so that our tracks don't bend on our trains in a day of extreme heat. Our Department of Environment is running a sustainable backyard program where they're incentivizing residents in Chicago to plant native plants in their backyard, which come with many benefits, from putting plants in your yard that have a deep root system and can manage groundwater effectively, to preventing your basement from flooding in a time when we're seeing extreme precipitation. So programs like these are some of the things that we're doing, but there are many, many actions that we're doing, and we work very closely with many other city departments. The Department of Environment is a convener and an implementer of these actions, but we really rely on good partnerships with our Department of Transportation that installs impervious land cover in the city so that we're managing stormwater and not putting a lot of pressure on our sewer system in a day of extreme precipitation. The Department of Public Health, when we're looking at the presence of disease in the city, or with Peter Raber at Office of Emergency Management and Communications, when we're seeing these days when we are really, the focus is on emergency response and communicating with people, not so much on just this long-term planning. So that's a little taste of some of the work that we're doing, but the city has very much considering climate change and really ensuring that we're relying on the best science. And often we don't say, we don't feel that we have to call an event climate change, but really we want to be able to protect our people and our land in Chicago.
Okay, Dr. Law?
Yeah, again, I'm Dr. Loaf. I'm one of the medical directors with the City Health Department, and the City Health Department is, as Livia noted, very engaged in climate change efforts. For our role, one of the major things that we're trying to do is we're trying to consider the effects on people, the effects of climate change on people, and with that information, trying to ensure that we have plans in place, capacities in place to be able to help people when these impacts of climate change are seen, and provide them the assistance that they really need.